welcome to Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Nick Trubridge. Ia haere nei, the synthetic opioid that could kill recreational drug users. Fentanyl is on the streets, so just how dangerous is it? Protests and rallies continue across the US, while back here a vocal anti-abortion MP has been silenced. GPs brace for yet more demand as a second booster shot becomes available, and eligibility for the flu jab is widened. So is there still capacity for free GP visits? We speak to the College of GPs live. Outrageous, $46 for a return trip. Waiheke locals respond to the looming increase to ferry fares. And COVID's red card, 3 All Blacks coaches and 2 players are down, 5 days out from the first Irish test.
RNZ News at 5. Ai Marie, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. The Wairarapa District Health Board has confirmed the people admitted to Wairarapa Hospital for suspected fentanyl overdoses over the weekend were aged between 31 and 71. The DHB says 5 men and 2 women were admitted to Wairarapa Hospital. The Needle Exchange Programme is an agency working against drug harm and has a branch in Masterton. National Harm Reduction Lead Jason George says they've had inquiries from people wanting testing strips and opioid overdose reversal medication since the news broke.
I'm not sure that we've had any inquiries directly at the branch, but we're certainly getting them coming through via our website. As soon as the news went live last night, we started getting inquiries.
Jason George says the programme's holding a pop-up drug checking clinic on Thursday. New Zealand will commit a further $8 million to Ukraine for medical supplies, extended intelligence and logistics deployments, and what it describes as non-lethal equipment. That includes items like military first aid kits, fuel, communications equipment and rations to come out of the NATO Trust Fund. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
New Zealand has imposed sanctions and spent more than $30 million on diplomatic, legal and humanitarian measures, and it continues to condemn Russia's ongoing assault on Ukraine. The deployment of Defence Force officers in the UK, Germany and Belgium has been extended, and a senior officer seconded to assist on international criminal court investigations. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern will attend a NATO summit in Spain this week, where she intends to discuss the trajectory of the war and further humanitarian aid likely to be needed.
GPs administering vaccines are expecting a surge in bookings for children to get the free flu vaccine and say it will put pressure on their struggling workforce. From Friday, children can get immunised against the flu after an increase in preschoolers being hospitalised with the illness. Northcare Accident and Medical's medical director, Dr Peter Boot, says he's expecting a surge in bookings.
They may make a small amount of work in the short term, but they hopefully will prevent a lot of more serious illness. We're probably better set up for vaccinating than we have been in previous years because we've been doing huge amounts of COVID vaccination.
Dr Boot says extending the free flu vaccine and second COVID-19 booster is a good move that could have come earlier. From tomorrow, a second COVID-19 booster will be available 6 months after the first one to anyone aged over 50 and a range of care workers over the age of 30. Parents against the COVID-19 vaccination for children say the government's decision-making must be questioned. A judicial review into the rollout for 5 to 11-year-olds is underway at the High Court in Wellington. Lawyer David Jones says he's representing a group who are deeply concerned about children's welfare. They claim the government didn't have enough information to make the rollout decision and ignored evidence of vaccine side effects. Mr Jones presented evidence today, some of which referenced disputed claims of vaccine safety by American physician Dr Robert Malone. Nationals leader Christopher Luxon insists all his MPs are on the same page and back his commitment not to change abortion law if elected next year. Mr Luxon has explicitly ruled out winding back access to abortion services or funding, despite his personal views, which he calls pro-life. He says the whole caucus supports the decision.
Everyone is united around the fact the laws are not changing. There will be no change under a national government. Services will be fully funded and the law is not going to be revisited or relitigated.
Christopher Luxon directed one of his MPs, Simon O'Connor, to remove a Facebook post over the weekend in support of the Roe versus Wade decision in the United States. Mr Luxon says he felt it was insensitive to those on the other side of the debate. To sport, and Joe Schmidt has been rushed in to help the All Blacks prepare for Saturday's first test against his former side Ireland at Eden Park after head coach Ian Foster and two of his assistants tested positive for COVID. Schmidt coached Ireland for 6 years, with his tenure including Ireland's first win over the All Blacks. Two players, David Havili and Jack Goodhue, have also tested positive for COVID. Another of Foster's assistant coaches, Brad Moore, says being able to bring in Schmidt, who will join the All Black selection panel later this year, is a bonus.
We've got Joe Schmidt coming in to help out. We need hands on the ground, and that's a wonderful resource. You know, who better to have than Joe to come in and cast an eye over a little bit of detail and put a shoulder to the wheel there for us.
And Silver Ferns coach Dame Nolene Taurua hasn't shied away from making some tough selection calls and naming her squad for next month's Commonwealth Games. Having failed to win a medal on the Gold Coast in 2018, the reigning world champs are determined to make amends in Birmingham. Shooter Tiana Mituado, who was key to the Pulse's ANZ Premiership win, has been dropped, along with mid-quarters Sam Winders and Claire Kirsten. Former captain Amelia-Ran Ikanazio has also failed to make the cut, with shooters Tepaya Selby-Rickett and Bailey Mess recalled to join Maya Wilson and Grace Nweke.
We need shooters that have volume or could put the shot up. Yes, there's still question mark over the accuracy, and I'm very aware of that, but we can move the accuracy, but definitely volume is important to us.
That's the news.
Widening access to trade.
The areas where we're looking to gain commercially meaningful access are also the areas of significant sensitivity for European markets.
Closing access to abortion.
This Supreme Court will strip away the basic human rights of over half of the people living here. I'm mad!
And keeping our music safe in an Arctic vault.
We're trying to put something culturally significant in there as our initial deposit, and Lilburn has that level of national significance.
Hitting the right notes. Morning Report weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
You're on Checkpoint next. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday. For the North Island, except Taranaki, Horowhenua, Kapiti Coast, Wellington and Wairarapa, mainly fine with areas of cloud, isolated showers about northern and western areas tomorrow. For Taranaki, Horowhenua, Kapiti Coast, Wellington and Wairarapa, cloudy areas, showers developing tomorrow, turning to heavy rain in Wellington by the evening. Nelson and Marlborough, fine today, rain tomorrow with some heavy falls. For Canterbury, rain is setting in this evening with snow to 400 metres inland overnight. Rains easing tomorrow afternoon. Bulla and Westland, rains spreading north today and tomorrow morning with heavy falls, then easing to a few showers north of Hokitika and clearing further south. Otago and Southland, scattered rain or showers, clearing tomorrow morning, leaving areas of cloud. For Fiordland, fine spells, the odd shower mainly in the south. And for Riokohu, the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods. The time is 7 minutes past 5. I'll have updated news headlines and traffic for the main centres for you at around 5:20.
Kia ora, good evening. This is Checkpoint. I'm Nick Trubridge. The drug that killed more than 100,000 Americans last year is now thought to be behind 12 overdoses in Wairarapa at the weekend. Now, the United Nations has described fentanyl as one of the world's deadliest drugs. Now, experts here are calling for better prevention before someone in New Zealand dies from it. Somya Barmaripati reports.
The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime released its annual World Drug Report in Vienna today, estimating more than 100,000 people in the US died from a fentanyl overdose last year alone. Now the drug has been found in New Zealand illicitly for just the second time. 5 men and 2 women between 31 and 71 years old are in Wairarapa Hospital, with another case in a Wellington hospital after overdosing on fentanyl. Detective Inspector Blair McDonald from the National Drug Intelligence Bureau says 2 people took the drug after buying what they thought was cocaine. He says the Bureau's still trying to find the supplier and how the drug got into the country.
We are very, very aware that this drug will cause harm because of it's highly active in such a small dose rate, and we are talking really just a few grains of salt as an active dose.
Drug Harm Reduction organisation Know Your Stuff says fentanyl was first identified in New Zealand in 2018 when it was sold as heroin. Managing Director Wendy Allison says its reappearance is not unexpected, and in the 4 years since, New Zealand has legalised drug checking and developed a national alert system for high-risk drugs. But she says it's concerning the synthetic is now being sold as cocaine because people are more likely to snort it, which may cause quicker overdoses and possible deaths.
We can't rule out the possibility that it's more widespread and we will see further cases. And even if we don't in this situation, fentanyl has now arrived on our shores, and based on what we've seen overseas, it's likely that we'll continue to see incidents like this cropping up.
The Needle Exchange Program says its Masterton branch is holding a pop-up drug checking clinic on Thursday after the spate of overdoses. They're also ordering in more fentanyl home test strips and naloxone, a medicine used to reverse opioid overdose. National Operations Manager Philippa Jones says they've had a slew of inquiries since news of the weekend's overdoses broke. She says the incident shows the need for more permanent drug checking services in places like Wairarapa.
We've got 20 outlets around the country, and quite a few of those outlets are in those more provincial areas. We're a licensed drug checker, so we've got all the capability to actually do this and to have these facilities available, but we just don't have any funding to actually make that happen.
Drug Foundation Executive Director Sarah Helm says these overdoses could have been avoided if New Zealand's 1975 drug laws had been updated. She says our laws are based on the American system, which clearly isn't working.
One of the reasons we have this situation at all is because people are purchasing drugs on a black market. They are criminalised, so we are struggling to find out where the community are. So we need to update our drug laws so that we can use a health-based approach.
Ms Helm says New Zealand also needs better resourcing for harm reduction and prevention initiatives, including funding to make naloxone more accessible. Deputy Prime Minister Grant Robertson says he's not aware of any concerns about the availability of naloxone.
Well, joining us now is Glenn Dobson, who's Chief Operating Officer of the Drug Detection Agency. Evening, Mr Dobson. Look, can we just start with, could you tell us how large a dose, I should say, of this drug it would take to kill someone?
Yeah, good evening, Nick. Look, it's one of the concerns about fentanyl is that it's an incredibly potent drug, and in its pure form, as little as a few grains of it, similar to a few grains of salt or sugar, could be a fatal dose.
And so how widespread is it in New Zealand at the moment?
Well, to be honest, we've been lucky in New Zealand to date in that the understanding is that as an illicit form of drug, it's not widespread, and obviously this is why it's getting a lot of media. As with the Drug Detection Agency, we're members of the California Narcotic Officers Association, and we get the global trends by being part of that association. And we've been keeping track of fentanyl since 2018, and it's been a case of when it hits our shores as opposed to if.
So if you did end up taking some, talk us through the effects and how quickly would they take hold?
Well, fentanyl is part of the opioid family, and so it's a depressant on your central nervous system. It slows your heart rate down, it slows your breathing down, and from there, any overdose has those effects on the body, and hence why people present into hospital or the medical environment. It's fairly fast-acting, and one of the other dangers around it is also it's very highly addictive.
In terms of, I guess, how widespread it is, what's your level of concern as to, I don't know, someone in the regions or in one of the cities could go out this weekend, think they're buying a bag of cocaine and in fact it's laced with fentanyl. What's your level of concern that could occur again this weekend?
Yeah, look, I guess there is a real concern out there with us at TDDA and also in the community, because at this stage we don't know how widespread it is. Certainly appears to be geographically constrained to the Wairarapa area at the moment, but how large that risk is unknown, and that unknown makes it a concern.
So if it's in Wairarapa, do you think it will be in other places? What's sort of your hunch here, I suppose?
Yeah, look, there's no exact science to that. I think it'd be unusual for it to be located just in one geography, and chances are it may be in other parts of New Zealand, but that's part of the intel gathering. I guess the police, the National Drug Intelligence Bureau, and the experts will be looking at.
How do you think it's actually arrived here? I mean, obviously it's used in a clinical setting and one would assume can be obtained legitimately that way. In this case, how do you think it's got here?
Yeah, look, it's a very powerful and very effective legitimate drug when prescribed and used correctly, but there's also a huge illegitimate market. There's illegitimate labs in both China and Mexico that produce it, and the latest DEA intel suggests that India is another country that's emerging with illicit labs. And from there, generally, the drugs will come through Canada and the US or Mexico and make their way down to Australasia.
What's your message to people who, we gave the example of might go out this weekend, might be wanting to buy some drugs and aren't sure what's in it? What would you say to those people?
Well, I guess with our organisation, we're about a lot about workplace safety, but also safety in the communities as well. And we're strong advocates around not taking drugs, and abstinence is your best safety mechanism.
Thanks, Glenn. That's Glenn Dobson there from the Drug Detection Agency. He's the Chief Operating Officer there. It is 15 minutes past 5. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Protests and rallies have continued across the US after a divided Supreme Court overruled the 1973 Roe v. Wade decision, leaving the question of an abortion's legality to individual states. Back home, Nationals leader Christopher Luxon insists all his MPs are on the same page when it comes to abortion law reform, promising a future government led by him won't make any changes. But one of his most conservative MPs, Simon O'Connor, has gone to ground after being directed to remove a Facebook post in support of the Roe v. Wade decision. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
Simon O'Connor has never been one to hold back his opinion.
I can smell the fear in this House from the pro-abortion side. The absolute reeking, stinking fear.
Elected in 2011, the National MP is a vocal member of the party's Conservative wing and a staunch opponent of any move to liberalise abortion.
Half the babies aborted are women. Go feminism. We're going to knock out half the babies that are girls. Well done there, ladies.
He was one of 55 MPs who last term unsuccessfully voted to block abortion from being removed from the Crimes Act. He concluded his speech like this.
I won't translate here, but it's mihi vindicta, ego retrobawum dici dominus.
It translates, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. On Saturday, Mr O'Connor posted on Facebook, today is a good day, a reference to the US Supreme Court judgment overturning Roe v. Wade. But by evening, the post had been removed at the request of his leader, Christopher Luxon.
I felt it was being misrepresented as the National Party position, and that is not the case. He's entitled to his personal views, but I also felt, frankly, it was insensitive to people on the other side of that debate.
Christopher Luxon does not want to be talking about abortion, and he doesn't want his MPs to be either. Since taking the helm of National, Mr Luxon has faced repeated questioning over his personal position. He calls himself pro-life and has agreed abortion is akin to murder. But he's also repeatedly stated he will not touch the country's abortion laws if elected next year.
Everyone is united around the fact the laws are not changing. There will be no change under a national government. Services will be fully funded and the law is not going to be revisited or relitigated.
The former National MP, Amy Adams, says Mr Luxon has made the right move.
To think that a major party in New Zealand would take the chance of putting those reforms at risk would be absolutely soul-destroying. So it was very good to see that was ruled out.
And she has a word of warning to her socially conservative former colleagues, noting the vast majority of New Zealanders regard abortion as a health issue for women.
When political parties want to wade into that space, it is wrong. They put themselves at great peril, but also they risk getting substantially out of touch with the people they represent.
And that is true even in a die-hard blue seat like Mr O'Connor's Tamaki electorate.
I think it's pretty in ill taste.
Don't know why men are always vocal about these things. I think it was quite wrong of him.
I don't believe he's read the room very well at all. I don't think many of the constituents would agree with that, quite frankly.
As for Simon O'Connor himself, the usually outspoken MP has not returned any of RNZ's calls.
Right, a bit of your feedback now. First of all, on fentanyl, someone's got in touch here saying the message should be do not buy or consume illicit drugs, full stop, this person says. Those hospitalisations put, well, additional or completely unnecessary pressure on our health sector, which if you listen to Checkpoint regularly, you'll know is, under a hell of a lot of pressure right now during flu season and COVID season. On the flu vax, why aren't school-wide vaccinations for COVID and influenza being done at school for participating parents? It has been done before and would take a load off GPs. It is 19 minutes past 5. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. A COVID outbreak has sought to sabotage the All Blacks' build-up to their first test of the year, against Ireland in Auckland on Saturday night. I'm excited. I hope you all are as well. Coach Ian Foster and two of his assistants, John Plumtree and Scott McLeod, along with midfield backs David Havili and Jack Goodhue, have all tested positive for COVID-19 and are now isolating. Former Ireland coach Joe Schmidt has been rushed in to help out the coaching staff. We're joined now by sports editor Stephen Hewson. Evening, Stephen.
Hey, Nick.
Are we going to see, I know you've got questions here, but I'm going to ask you about RTS because I'm a Warriors fan. Roger Tuivasa-Sheck, two midfielders out with COVID. Could we see him, well, maybe not starting, but could he sneak onto the bench, do you think?
Well, it's always a possibility, isn't it? And who knows whether any more of them come down with COVID in the interim. I mean, we're still 5 or 6 days away from the test. I suppose the only silver lining in that respect is that many of the players, Blues included, when you're talking RTS, have already had COVID through the Super Rugby Pacific season. We saw how disjointed that season was with many teams having to have rescheduled games because so many players came down with COVID. So that presumably gives them some sort of, a wee bit of immunity for a while, doesn't it, for a couple of months. So that could help them out, but who knows how many else could come down and where that leaves them. They called in Braden Enor as part of the, or to call up to cover that midfield for Havili and Goodhue. But yeah, it certainly boosts Roger Tuivasa-Sheck's chance to make his debut for the All Blacks.
And so they've been in camp, haven't they? So chances of this, well, affecting more players, chances of the test in general being in jeopardy, what do you think?
Well, like I said, you'd think a fair few of them already had it, so hopefully not. But they've been in Northland and now for a training camp. They're about to, or have assembled now in Auckland, a training there ahead of Saturday's test. You mentioned there I suppose the interesting fact is that you've got Joe Schmidt now coming into the mix. It's quite fascinating given his history. 6 years he spent with Ireland coaching them. In fact, he was the coach when Ireland recorded their first ever win over the All Blacks, and Schmidt took them to 2 wins all up against the All Blacks. The last time the two sides met, November last year, Ireland had a win. So, the All Blacks are looking to turn things around against Ireland, and this can only make things more awkward for them in trying to turn that around. You've got Foster and the likes of Plumtree having to zoom in for meetings and things with players and not actually have a presence there. And they simply need coaches on the ground to try and organise things when you've got a large squad of 36 players or so, just having people around to make sure things are running smoothly.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Interesting times indeed. Of course, a lot of pressure on Mr. Foster already, isn't there? So we'll see what happens with the test. Hopefully it goes our way. We'll see on Saturday. Hey, thanks, Stephen. It is 22 minutes past 5. Kia ora iti iwi. Coming up, the College of GPs on the added pressure they're dealing with this winter. Don't forget you can text us 2101 and you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us Checkpoint, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Now here's the headlines with Evie.
Kia ora, Nick. A dozen people have been hospitalised due to suspected fentanyl overdoses in Wairarapa. It's thought that the drug, a white powder, was missold as cocaine or methamphetamine. Chief Operating Officer of the Drug Detection Agency, Glenn Dobson, told Checkpoint fentanyl is a potent drug and a few grains can be fatal. GPs administering vaccines are expecting a surge in bookings for children to get the free flu vaccine and say it will put pressure on their struggling workforce. From Friday, children aged 3 to 12 years old can get immunised against the flu after an increase in preschoolers being hospitalised with the illness. Nationals leader Christopher Luxon insists all his MPs are on the same page and back his commitment not to change abortion law if elected next year. Mr Luxon has explicitly ruled out winding back access to abortion services or funding, despite his personal views, which he calls pro-life. He says the whole caucus supports the decision. A community board chair says neighbourhood policing will provide support for Christchurch residents living on the street of a fatal stabbing. Hallswell Hornby Riccarton Community Board Chair Mike Mora says neighbourhood policing systems have been proven to make suburbs safer. New Zealand will commit another $8 million to help Ukraine. The aid comprises of non-lethal equipment, including military first aid kits, fuel, communications equipment and rations. And police are asking for the public's help to identify the body of a woman found in the sea at Kobe near Miramar today. A member of the public first noticed the body in the water shortly after midday. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic in Wellington, the Terrace Tunnel northbound on State Highway 1 was closed for a time just over an hour ago because of an overheight vehicle. It's blocking proceedings, but that should be rolling through now. Otherwise, nothing else to report in the main centres. We'll have updated headlines and traffic for you at around 5:40.
Yeah, that Terrace Tunnel, I've been stuck in there a few times. Anyway, GPs and pharmacists administering vaccines are expecting a surge in bookings for children to get the free flu vaccine and say it will put pressure on their struggling workforce. From Friday, children aged 3 to 12 years old will be able to get immunised against the flu after health officials were told of an increase in preschoolers being hospitalised with the illness this winter. And from tomorrow, a second COVID-19 booster will be available 6 months after the first one to anyone aged over 50, as well as health, aged care and disability care workers over the age of 50. Amy Williams reports.
Winter illness from the flu is putting extreme pressure on the country's health system, leading some hospitals to offer free GP consults to divert patients from turning up at emergency departments. Expanding the free flu vaccine can't come soon enough for those at Auckland's Viaduct today.
I think it's awesome. My daughter has had flu this winter, so I'm definitely going to get it for my boy here. He's 11.
Right now, with the flu pandemic a little bit coming in as well, I think like free flu shots, it's a good idea.
It's definitely a good idea. We've had a very bad flu season back home. Not so much COVID this year, but a terrible flu season. So, yeah, any boosters or anything that will help them, yeah.
Those on the front line delivering the vaccine say expanding access is welcome, but it comes with an added workload. Pakuranga Unichem pharmacist Vicky Chan says they've already had parents bringing their children in for the flu vaccine. Knowing it's free from Friday, she expects bookings to flow in.
With the peak of winter and all the logistic issues, a bit more notice would be great, but I think we will just have to try to estimate the demand, because I can imagine once the news out that we would definitely see quite a significant surge.
She says extending the free flu vaccine and second COVID-19 booster is a good move, but will put pressure on teams delivering the doses.
Our workforce has a very big problem with staff at the moment. So, but again, I think pharmacies are very good with just stepping up. So it definitely will put pressure onto the pharmacy team, because, we are doing many things at the same time.
GPs are already struggling with the surge in winter illnesses affecting patients and their own health workforce. On the North Shore, North Care Accident and Medical is seeing more people with winter illness. Its medical director, Dr. Peter Boot, says extending the free flu vaccine and second COVID-19 booster is a good move, and he expects a surge in bookings.
They may make a small amount of work in the short term, but they hopefully will prevent a lot of more serious illness.
He says the clinic has a COVID-19 vaccination centre and is well set up to cope with extra bookings.
We're probably better set up for vaccinating than we have been in previous years, because we've been doing huge amounts of COVID vaccination, and so our whole vaccination setups are very well oiled, and it's not difficult to push the flu vaccines through the same pathways.
Vicky Chan asks for extra understanding from people keen to get a free flu vaccination or second COVID-19 booster.
That will definitely see very significant increase in, workload for our pharmacy team. So, patients, please be a little bit more patient with us.
The government is unlikely to introduce stricter COVID measures, such as compulsory face masks in schools or a change in the COVID setting, as pressure on the health system continues.
And just a little correction there, of course, that's aged care workers over the age of 30 who are eligible, not 50. Meanwhile, GP clinics opened their doors for free visits funded by DHBs in Auckland and Wellington over the weekend. While it's taking some of the strain from overloaded emergency departments, it means GPs are shouldering yet more load. So joining us now is Dr. Brian Betty, the Medical Director of the College of GPs. Evening, Dr. Betty. Can you talk to us first of all about, we've covered a lot recently how much your members are facing in terms of workload. What extra is this going to put on them?
Well, for a lot of clinics, it does put on extra burden because they're having to do an extended hours. What we're seeing at the moment, as you've quite rightly reported, is a huge surge in demand on a sector that's already working at capacity, and that's the important thing to note. But as well as that, a lot of doctors and nurses and practice staff are becoming unwell themselves. So in a lot of cases, we're seeing practices with reduced staff trying to do more work. So, look, it is a bit of a difficult situation at the moment.
We heard last week about one GP who saw 62 patients in a day, I believe it was. How common is that at the moment?
Look, that is happening in parts of the country. We're seeing various parts of the country that are underserviced by general practitioners. That is, there's not enough doctors on the ground or nurses on the ground. And the doctors and nurses are doing a lot of extra work on top of what they normally do. So that situation is not uncommon around the country. It is certainly happening, and it is a concern.
A lot of people off with the flu at the moment. A lot of people around, our organisation off with the flu. It seems to be everywhere. Sort of anecdotally hearing about the flu affecting some people to a worse extent than COVID. What are you hearing? Is it really case by case? Can that be the case?
It's a very individual thing. But I am hearing from around the country that a lot of younger people in particular are getting affected very badly by the flu this year. It's probably a reflection of the fact the last 2 years flu hasn't actually been in the country, so we've probably got a lower natural immunity than we normally would, and as a result it seems to be quite virulent this year and affecting people, in particular the younger age groups.
What is the cause of the greater effects, Dr. Betty? Is it we've sort of been locked up for a couple of years. Does that have any effect?
Well, it certainly does, and it's certainly having an effect in terms of the amount of illness we're seeing this year. And I suppose the other thing to say is that in general practice's case, the doctors and nurses have been really stepping up to the mark in the front line of medical care. So the sector is really, really tired at the moment, and this has just really added to the pressure that's actually there at this point.
In terms of patients per day, how many are GPs seeing from what you've heard?
Look, it varies around the country. An average workload for a full-time day for a GP is usually around 20 to 25 patients. But we know in a lot of cases there's patients being squeezed in, being put into clinics on top of the normal workload, so that number can rise. And in the extreme case you just quoted previously of the doctor up north who saw 65 in one day. So that's a very, very difficult situation.
Thank you, Dr. Betty. Appreciate your time. That's Dr. Brian Betty there from the College of GPs. It is 32 minutes past 5. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Nick Trubridge in for Lisa Owen. Time for the business news now with Giles Beckford. Evening, Giles. We're going to start with New Zealand King Salmon. A contrite and apologetic New Zealand King Salmon fronts its shareholders at the annual meeting. Tell us about that.
Kia ora to you, Nick. Yes, something I thought you very rarely see in corporate New Zealand, but here was a chief executive and at least one of the directors, and in all their formal material, saying sorry for last year's really shock result, which was a $70 million loss. Now, the reasons are many and varied. There were COVID disruptions, but one of the chief reasons for the company's ill fortune has been warming waters, and they farm in Marlborough Sounds. And progressively over the past few years, the temperatures have been rising, and with it has come a rise in the death rate of the salmon that they farm there. Now, all the measures they took to try and mitigate that, many of them didn't work effectively enough. And so the company, it found itself in a financial sense with its back to the wall. It had to raise $60 million from shareholders and other financial investors who, and the shares were sold at a really cheap rate, something like an 80% discount, which is a shocker for any company. So to see the chief executive and one of the directors say, "We're sorry, we apologise, we know we caused you pain, and we need to work to get your unconditional confidence back." And that's something, those are words that you don't very often hear certainly in various companies that are listed and talking to their shareholders. So I thought, in contrast to perhaps to a rather large top 10 NZX listed company that's been in the news recently, interesting to see that level of regret and contrition. And if we want to see a company that's perhaps, and I use the analogy somewhat poorly perhaps, but the canary in the coal mine of climate change, this is it. It's facing warmer waters, and progressively they will get warmer under climate change. It's looking to move out into Cook Strait where the waters are cool or cooler, and it's waiting for a new decision from one of the environmental agencies on that, possibly by the end of September. But something to note in New Zealand corporate history, of recent memory at least.
We're going to go from salmon right to the other end of the spectrum, liquidations. Number of companies going into liquidation are still below pre-pandemic levels. What's going on there?
Well, we would have thought with COVID and the way it had ravaged corporate New Zealand that perhaps the number of companies that failed and go into liquidation or insolvent or call on the receivers would be quite high. But in fact, it's running at about half the rate that it was before the pandemic even hit. And that's been put down to variously the measures brought in by the government. There was a business lending scheme there. About $3 billion was lent to more than 3,000 companies there to keep them going. IRD stopped collecting tax for a period to make sure that companies had cash. Now, it is starting to creep up a little bit in terms of IRD seems to be getting back to business, and they've put a couple of companies into receivership recently because they couldn't pay their back taxes. But there's a suggestion that, in fact, the real effect of the zombie companies, the ones who've been hanging on by their fingertips, won't become obvious for another 3 or 4 years. That's the sort of time lag that you have. Companies stagger from crisis to crisis until finally, somebody either moves in to wind them up or they just accept the inevitable. And there's been a suggestion from one law expert, in fact, we need to change our insolvency laws so that at the moment we have a process where a company can go into administration. Essentially, it puts a ring fence around the company. It means the creditors can't move in and carve up the company and take what they're owed and to hell with the rest. This means that there's an orderly winding down, an attempt to perhaps restructure and save the company. But it's complicated, it's costly, and this law expert suggests that perhaps we need to follow the Australian example, which has just been brought into operation there in the past year or so, which is simpler, cheaper, far more effective in actually saving small to medium-sized companies. And they are, of course, the bulk of the companies that employ the New Zealand workforce. So there is a vested interest in keeping them going where possible and certainly being able to salvage things better rather than just having a lot of dead corporate entities being brushed under the carpet or swept to one side. So we'll wait and see on that one. An interesting suggestion to be followed through.
Yeah, absolutely. Quick rip round the markets, please.
Share markets had its best single session since early March. It's now back to where it was in mid-June. 184-point gain, that's 1.7%, just a whisker under 11,000 for the top 50 index. New Zealand dollar, it's holding steady at 63.1 US cents, 91.1 Australian. And for the listener who seems to be perpetually vexed because we don't always give the pound sterling, I can tell you, 51.4 British pence.
Thanks, Giles. Giles Beckford there with our business news. Well, banks are filling their pockets with the increase in interest rates, and the time taken to pay off a mortgage is blowing out. A KiwiSaver fund manager says banks are doubling their margins on floating rate home loans as the Reserve Bank continues to lift the OCR. George Carter is the managing director of fund manager and KiwiSaver provider Nico AM NZ and joins us now. Evening, George. Spell out first of all what the interest rate hikes mean for banks exactly.
Yeah, good evening, Nick. Well, look, the issue is we've looked back over the last 20 years or so, and what we observe is that in the early part of this century, the variable rate that you paid on your mortgage was about 2% higher than the official cash rate. And over time, that official cash rate has come down, but the variable rate hasn't fallen as quickly. So the margin or the spread above that has increased. And we're at a situation today where that spread or that differential is now about 4%. So compared with where it was 15, 20 years ago, it's kind of doubled. And that has a massive impact on the amount of interest you'll pay on your mortgage over its lifetime.
Yeah, so why? I mean, I was looking at one bank's floating rate today, for example, and as you say, it's about 4% over that OCR. Why have we seen the gap between the mortgage rate the banks offer and the OCR widen, do you think?
Well, I think it's more that when the OCR is dropping, it's easier for the banks to keep the variable rate at a level because you kind of don't notice that margin increasing quite so much because you're paying the same amount, or maybe it's dropping a little bit. But now that interest rates are starting to rise and that margin's still staying at about 4%, it's having a huge impact on borrowers. So, for example, if we were to take a young couple borrowing $1 million to get into their first home, which unfortunately is probably quite a reasonable scenario in today's environment, that differential is going to make about $600,000 difference in interest payments over the life of their mortgage.
So what do we need here? Do we need some sort of cap on floating rates, for example? What do you suggest?
Well, I think the main thing's around consumer awareness. You know, we want to know what people are paying for. When we go and buy our beef burgers or go and buy our milk or our coffees, we kind of know what we should be paying and what the right sort of price is. And I suspect that on the variable rate, what's happening is that a number of people are maybe a little bit unaware of some of this dynamic, and we just want to see more consumer awareness and know what they're paying for what they're getting.
Thanks, George. That's George Carter there from Nico AM. He is the managing director. It is 19 minutes to 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Coming up, we'll speak to an Auckland councillor seeing red over Waiheke ferry price hikes. Don't forget you can text us on 2101 and you can tweet us as well at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us Checkpoint or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Here's Evie with the headlines.
Thank you. The Waded Upper District Health Board has confirmed the people admitted to Waded Upper Hospital for suspected fentanyl overdoses over the weekend were aged between 31 and 71. The DHB says 5 men and 2 women were admitted to Waded Upper Hospital. GPs administering vaccines are expecting a surge in bookings for children to get the free flu vaccine and say it will put pressure on their struggling workforce. From Friday, children aged 3 to 12 years old can get immunised against the flu after an increase in preschoolers being hospitalised with the illness. The 3-week trial of the 2 men accused of mishandling political donations came to an end in the High Court at Auckland today. It's the Crown's case the pair deceived the New Zealand First Party, including its leader, by collecting and spending more than $750,000. In his closing arguments, defence lawyer Tudor Clee said only Winston Peters can prove the Crown's case and he was never called to give evidence. A KiwiSaver fund manager says banks are doubling their margins on floating rate home loans as the Reserve Bank continues to lift the OCR. Managing Director of Nico Asset Management, George Carter, told Checkpoint it's having a huge impact on borrowers. And a union leader is calling for mandatory reporting of gender pay differences. New research shows New Zealand is falling behind other Western countries in closing the gap between men and women's wages. Secretary of the New Zealand Council of Trade Union, Melissa Ansell-Bridges, believes having transparency around wages will help address inequality. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, there's no unusual traffic delays in any of the main centres that we can see. I'll have a full news bulletin and the short weather forecast for you at 6.
Thanks, Evie. The defence has come out swinging in the New Zealand First Foundation trial today, saying only Winston Peters can prove the Crown's case. Its closing arguments brought the judge-alone trial in the High Court in Auckland to an end today. Justice Jargo's reserving his decision. Our political reporter Annika Smith has more.
Over the past 3 weeks, New Zealand First Party leader Winston Peters has been the elephant in the courtroom. His name has come up time and time again, and yet the trial hasn't heard any evidence from him. This was the focal point of the defence's closing arguments today in the case against 2 men who still have interim name suppression, accused of mishandling political donations. Defence lawyer Tudor Clee argued without Winston, the Crown doesn't have a case.
The Crown says Mr. Peters, who plainly trusted simply proceeded on the basis, as told the SFO, that it had been ensured that everything was legal, that he too was oblivious as to what was really going on. So effectively, sir, what the Crown is saying is that Mr. Peters was duped. And if that's the case, sir, what is the point in not calling him?
The Crown does say Winston Peters was duped. It alleges the 2 men deployed a fraudulent device, trick or stratagem to fool the party, including its board and its leader, by collecting and spending $750,000 that should have been treated as political donations. The trial has heard from an array of New Zealand First characters, a party secretary, former MP and operations manager, but not its leader. Tudor Clee argued Mr. Peters' absence leaves holes in the Crown's case only he can fill.
He was and remains the leader, the senior executive of the party, and was present at all material times in this case. He is readily available. Even the Speaker of the House could find him to serve a trespass notice.
The Serious Fraud Office does have the power to compel someone to give evidence in court. Mr. Clee went as far as inferring it decided against forcing Winston Peters to give evidence out of fear he would contradict their case. It's an allegation prosecutor John Dixon QC said the judge should dismiss.
There is no evidence one way or the other on that before Your Honour. In fact, it's misleading because he did in fact answer questions, but I'm not going to go into that because I'm not going to give evidence from the bar. There is no evidence before Your Honour, and I invite Your Honour to disregard that submission.
The men are accused of mishandling political donations, but they're not charged under the Electoral Act. The Serious Fraud Office charged them with obtaining by deception under the Crimes Act, just a few weeks out from the 2020 general election. Tudor Clee criticised the case's development over time, saying the Crown's case is a suspicion searching for a statute.
This was an attempt by the SFO to shoehorn an offence under the Electoral Act into the Crimes Act. And that provides perhaps the most succinct explanation of why the Crown struggled so much over 2 years to simply find a way of explaining what happened.
Justice Jargos has reserved his decision, signalling he'll deliver it reasonably promptly. It could still be a matter of weeks before it's ready.
It's 13 minutes to 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. An Auckland councillor has hit out at a decision by Fuller's to increase fare prices. The price of Waiheke, Rangitoto and Coromandel trips is going up 8.4%, with the ferry operator saying it suffered some massive losses. That means a return trip to Waiheke will now set you back $46, up from $42. A monthly pass will now be, get this, $403. Fuller's partly blames record high fuel prices. It says the marine diesel it uses doesn't qualify for cost relief measures from the government. Some Waiheke Island residents told us they're infuriated.
It's outrageous. It's about time that the council does something about it, the government, whatever, but it does, no. Personally, I just wait to get out of the island. It's not fun anymore.
Others saw it coming.
Everything's going up with petrol, so it's bound to happen. I think they did a really good service during COVID, giving everyone the essential services across. I think they do their best, so I think we feel that it's acceptable.
The price hikes apply from Friday and also affect the Rangitoto Island, Rotorua Island and Coromandel services. Well, joining us now is Auckland Councillor Chris Darby. Evening, Councillor Darby.
Hi, Maria, Nick.
Hey, good to hear from you again. Look, this has been an issue in Auckland as long as the memory goes, really. Fuller's having, well, pretty much a run of things on the water. How are things going to change? What do we need to do here?
Yeah, look, this is a decade-long exemption, goes back to a previous Minister of Transport who gave them the free run, and the residents of Waiheke and Devonport have had to pay for that, unlike all the other commuters all over Auckland who are part of an integrated service, they are not. So things have to change, and the Minister of Transport has just today confirmed things are going to change.
Yeah, but we've heard this before, haven't we? If I recall, I believe it was 2019, Phil Twyford said he was going to do the same. Nothing's happened. So what are you expecting this time around?
Yeah, well, look, something has been happening, and it's just not that visible to people because there's a very convoluted process that, to give credit to the former Minister, Phil Twyford, he did kick it off, but the current Minister of Transport has really grabbed it by the neck, so to speak, and he has instructed Auckland Transport and Fuller's on a number of occasions to go to the table and reach an agreement. Now, there has been progress on reaching an agreement on the Devonport service. That's one of the exempt services. It's proven a lot more difficult on the Waiheke service. So the minister's got wind of this, and he's just called it enough is enough, and he is now instructing a formal review of what's called the public transport operating model.
It's convoluted, as you say, the public transport operating model. Tell us exactly what it is, the situation it's caused, and what the minister is actually proposing here.
Yeah, well, look, it's an exemption from the oversight of the transport regulator. In Auckland, we've got a big network for public transport, bus, train, ferry, many hundreds of services running all the time, moving, several million trips around the city every day. There are two parts to that network which are exempt from Auckland Transport's oversight. They can't regulate that particular part of the network. They can't integrate the ticketing. They can't contract the services. Their observation is weak, and their involvement in making sure that part of the network, those two ferry services, run well and run affordably and run in favour of commuters is a very weak opportunity. And so that is the thrust of the review, and taking them out of that model and putting them under the oversight of that regulator body.
So how did we find ourselves in, well, what quite frankly is a tangle and a bit of a mess in the first place?
Yeah, look, it goes back to lobbying that the former Fuller's owners did to a previous government. Stephen Joyce was the minister then. Stephen Joyce found favour with Fuller's, and the rest is history. To be honest, Nick, it's not worth looking in the rearview mirror now. We need to look forward and get the very best for the commuters on Waiheke. There's some 10,000 residents on Waiheke, and this is their umbilical cord off the island. There's no bus lanes off the island or bike lanes or pedestrian paths. It's just the ferry. So it's absolutely critical for them. And to a lesser extent, the Devonport residents as well.
How long are people going to have to wait here? I mean, there'll be plenty of Waiheke people listening to the show. They're all friends of the show. How long are they going to have to wait? As you said, they've been waiting a decade. Minister Wood said it's going to take some time. What assurances can you give them?
Yeah, well, look, from what I'm hearing from the Minister today, Michael Wood, he has taken this to remove the exemption. He's been quite exercised. He's been quite frustrated. And we are making progress on negotiating the Devonport service. And I think there'll be an announcement from both Fuller's and Auckland Transport within about 2 weeks. On the Waiheke service, we need to make sure that we maintain a reliable service there to Waiheke, and we proceed in a way that the law requires us all to proceed, both Fuller's and the government through the Ministry of Transport. There is a set process, but the Minister has given unequivocal words today that it's there for review. He's had enough.
Thanks, Chris. That's Auckland Councillor Chris Darby there on the situation with Fuller's hiking its prices. 2 weeks, he says, an announcement in 2 weeks, so we'll be straight back on that when we have updates. Silver Ferns coach Dame Nolene Taurua has unveiled a number of surprises as she named her team for the Commonwealth Games. The Silver Ferns will be determined to be competitive in Birmingham after hitting rock bottom when they finished fourth at the 2018 Commonwealth Games. Bridget Tunnicliffe reports.
Kate Heffernan is poised to debut in Birmingham after being named in the 12 for next month's Games. Heffernan will become a double international after representing New Zealand in cricket in 2018. Dame Nolene says the tall mid-courter took her opportunities at last week's trials.
Defensively, she's a strong centre defence, and her games or her ability to turn over the ball is definitely of value to us. I thought that she had an outstanding trials and probably showed the shift that she's made in her feeding as well.
Sam Winders and Claire Kirsten have been dropped from the mid-court. The pair have been mainstays for the past couple of years, and Winders was last year named Silver Ferns Player of the Year. Captain Gina Crampton and Shannon Saunders have retained their spots, while 14 Test cap wing attack Whitney Souness has been recalled. Former Silver Ferns coach Yvonne Willering says adding height to the mid-court is a good move for Birmingham.
We've got to stop that ball in mid-court. We're going to come against teams that have got very tall shooters, and that's a situation where we can't rely just on our goalkeepers and goal defences to get balls, so we need to get the ball early.
Despite having a great ANZ Premiership season, shooter Tiana Matuaro has been dropped but is named as a reserve. Shooters Tapaya Selby-Rickett and Bailey Mears have been recalled and will join Maya Wilson and Grace Weki, subject to Weki getting medical clearance as she works her way back from an ankle sprain. Dame Nolene says she wants shooters who can put up a large number of shots.
We need shooters that have volume or could put the shot up. Yes, there's still question mark over the accuracy, and I'm very aware of that, but we can move the accuracy, but definitely volume is important to us.
Former captain Amelia-Ann Ignacio, who has been racing against time to regain her fitness after having her second child, has not been named in the 12 but is down as a reserve. The defensive end is made up of Kelly Jury, Sulu Fitzpatrick, Phoenix Karaka and Kayla Johnson. Willering says it's a very balanced side.
I think most of the players are able to play two positions. I think that fitness results must have come into it as well, but certainly I think it's about that, but also about the different combinations that are available to Nolene.
Dame Nolene says she's excited with the selection and says it was important the team didn't become too predictable.
It's turned out we've got a bit of experience, but also there is a bit of unpredictability, and I think that's going to be good for us going into the Commonwealth Games.
The Silver Ferns will compete in the Cadbury Netball Series next month and will depart for Birmingham on July the 21st.
A union leader is calling for mandatory reporting of gender pay differences. New research shows New Zealand is falling behind other Western countries in closing the gap between men and women's wages. The average pay gap in this country is 9%, but the difference in pay for a Pacifica woman and a Pakeha man is 25%. Mohammed Al-Fashat reports.
Gender pay gaps have flourished in a culture of continued secrecy around salaries, and a new report for the UN shows more work is needed to shine a light on discrimination in the workplace. According to the research, one way to address the gender pay gap is for all organisations to publicly report the differences. Secretary of the New Zealand Council of Trade Union, Melissa Answell-Bridges, believes Māori and Pacifica women are disproportionately disadvantaged in the workplace.
Reducing the secrecy around pay and having companies reporting on their pay gaps, having that transparency is a brilliant way of actually encouraging people to take action on it in their own workplaces.
Australia, the UK, France, Spain, Sweden and South Africa have all introduced compulsory reporting, but New Zealand hasn't. It's something Westpac decided to do in 2019. Its then Chief Executive David McLean told 9 to Noon the bank's gender pay gap was 30%, and that only dropped to 28% last year.
What that showed us was there's something about our organisation we hadn't realised, and that is that there was a heavy concentration of women in the lower paid roles, like in branches and contact centres, and a heavy concentration of men in the higher paid roles, like things like IT, business banking and those sort of areas.
Bridging the Gap author Mina Cooper-Coles says the move towards mandatory reporting can highlight where inequalities exist and help companies address them.
Something that we'd love to see introduced more worldwide was an element of intersectionality, so ethnicity becoming something that can be reported on, because in many countries, like in the UK, we have the pay gap is different across different ethnicities as well. And I think that's something where New Zealand has its opportunity to be very world-leading.
Mind the Gap New Zealand is campaigning for the government to make gender pay reporting mandatory. Its co-founder, Delwyn Stewart, says this will have a huge impact on addressing inequality.
Look, we're asking businesses to step up and report. We know a lot of businesses do measure but don't publicly report. Transparency is incredibly important to current consumers, investors and staff in terms of the way that they look where they spend their time and money.
The CTU's Melissa Answell-Bridges says eco-pay legislation is not enough.
We've had some great settlements under that act as well, but the job is not done. The work is ongoing. There is still significant inequality and still a lot of work to be done.
Unaddressed, the gender pay gap can hinder global efforts to build fair and more inclusive societies.
A little bit of feedback before the news. I wonder if Wellingtonians and their electric ferry are laughing at Aucklanders and their ever more costly ferry services, this person says, and refullers. The same goes for, get this, the Wellington cable car not being operated for public benefit. An end to that exemption as well, this person says. One on GPs, why aren't school ride vaccinations for COVID and influenza being done at school for participating parents?
RNZ News at 6. Good evening. Kia ora tātou. Ko Evie Ashton tēnei. A drug testing company is worried there'll be more fentanyl overdoses and doubts the powerful opioid is only being used illegally in the Waded Upper. 7 people were taken to Waded Upper Hospital over the weekend for suspected overdoses. The police say there's no evidence to suggest widespread underground use here. Glenn Dobson from the Drug Detection Agency has a different view.
I think it'd be unusual for it to be located just in one geography, and chances are it may be in other parts of New Zealand, but that's part of the intel gathering I guess the police, the National Drug Intelligence Bureau and the experts will be looking at.
Glenn Dobson says there are illegal labs in China, Mexico and India producing fentanyl. He says in its pure form, a couple of grains is enough to kill someone. GPs administering vaccines are expecting a surge in bookings for children to get the free flu vaccine and say it will put pressure on their struggling workforce. From Friday, children aged 3 to 12 years old can get immunised against the flu after an increase in preschoolers being hospitalised with the illness. Amy Williams reports.
North Care Accident and Medical's Medical Director Dr Peter Boot says he's expecting a surge in flu vaccine bookings will put pressure on the practice. But having offered COVID-19 vaccines, he's confident they'll cope. ProCare Clinical Director Dr Alan Moffat says many areas are experiencing higher rates of hospitalisation for flu than for COVID-19. He's encouraging people to get immunised and protect themselves against serious illness, while the health workforce is at capacity.
New Zealand will commit a further $8 million to Ukraine for medical kit, extended intelligence and logistics deployments, and what it describes as non-lethal equipment. That includes items such as military first aid kits, fuel, communications equipment and rations, which will come out of the NATO Trust Fund. New Zealand's imposed sanctions and spent more than $30 million on diplomatic, legal and humanitarian measures and continues to condemn Russia's ongoing assault on Ukraine. The deployment of Defence Force officers in the UK, Germany and Belgium has been extended, and a senior officer seconded to assist on International Criminal Court investigations. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern will attend a NATO summit in Spain this week. The Ukrainian President, Volodymyr Zelensky, will tonight address the leaders of the G7 group of nations at a summit in Germany. He's expected to renew his calls for more heavy weapons, as the BBC's James Landale reports.
This summit has a broad agenda, from tackling climate change to helping poorer countries with infrastructure. But Ukraine continues to dominate. President Zelensky will talk directly to the leaders and is expected to call again for heavy artillery and air defences. The G7 leaders are expected to offer more support and further sanctions on Russia. But even Boris Johnson, one of Mr. Zelensky's most vocal supporters, admits defending Ukraine's sovereignty has tough consequences for the rest of the world, particularly the rising costs of food and energy.
State housing provider Kāinga Ora is suspending plans for a development on a northern Auckland street after residents complained it came out of the blue. Kāinga Ora planned to build 37 homes and a community room on Bonaire Crescent in the suburb of Millwater. But its regional director, Taina Jones, acknowledges the development took residents by surprise. She says Kāinga Ora has halted existing plans and will talk to residents before further decisions are made. Taina Jones says Kāinga Ora should have spoken to locals earlier. A community board chair says neighbourhood policing will provide support for Christchurch residents living on the street of a fatal stabbing. Laisa Maraya Waka was attacked outside her Cheyenne Street home on Saturday while her 11-year-old son watched in horror from the house. Hallswell Hornby Riccarton Community Board chairperson Mike Mora says the system makes a difference, as shown in nearby Riccarton.
They're very, very supportive. They really engage well with the community. They've made that area of Riccarton feel a lot safer since they were there. So community policing is very important.
Mike Mora says a team will be checking in with Cheyenne Street residents over the next few days. He says it's an important program that police should prioritise and expand. The defence in the New Zealand First Foundation trial says only Winston Peters can prove the Crown's case. The 3-week trial of the 2 men accused of mishandling political donations came to an end in the High Court at Auckland today. It's the Crown's case the pair deceived the New Zealand First Party, including its leader, by collecting and spending more than $750,000. In his closing arguments, defence lawyer Tudor Clee said only Winston Peters can prove this, and he was never called to give evidence.
He was and remains the leader, the senior executive of the party, and was present at all material times in this case. He is readily available. Even the Speaker of the House could find him to serve a trespass notice.
Justice Jagos has reserved his decision in the judge-alone trial. The body of a woman has been found in the sea off the coast of Miramar in Wellington today. The death is being treated as unexplained and police want public help to identify her. A member of the public saw the body in the water by Kobe about 12:45 this afternoon. The woman's thought to be Māori or Pasifika and has the words "ride or die" tattooed on her left inner forearm. Police want to hear from anyone who may have been in the area today. To sport, and a COVID outbreak has sought to sabotage the All Blacks' build-up to their first rugby test of the year against Ireland in Auckland on Saturday night. Head coach Ian Foster and 2 of his assistants, John Plumtree and Scott McLeod, along with midfield backs David Havili and Jack Goodhue, have all tested positive and are isolating. That's left another assistant, Brad Moa, at the helm this week, but he says they had planned for COVID taking out players and management.
We're seamless. It's not an unforeseen event, is it? You know, we've planned for what will happen in this situation, and Plum and Foz have been zooming in, and we will put the week together no differently to we would in any other situation.
Former Ireland coach Joe Schmidt, who is soon to become an All Black selector, has been called in to help out. And the Headingley wicket is starting to deteriorate, but is unlikely to be enough to save the Black Caps from a cricket series clean sweep at the hands of England. England will resume on day 5 in Leeds at 183 for 2, needing just another 113 runs for a 3-0 series win. Wicket-keeper Tom Blundell admits they'll need a few things to go their way.
The wicket is deteriorating, a little bit of variable bounce, obviously with the spin as well. It looks like it's quite hard to drive with that older ball. But yeah, I think it's going to deteriorate even more, and hopefully we can utilise that tomorrow.
Ollie Pope will resume on 81 and Joe Root on 55. Some rain is forecast. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, James Stevens on living with aphasia, which affects his ability to understand written and spoken language, something he's had to live with since a stroke in 2015. Brad Warrington continues his journey through hip-hop in Aotearoa, while this week's sportscaster Helene Elliott from the LA Times assesses Serena Williams' Wimbledon hopes. given she's made a surprise return to competitive tennis. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
You're back with Nick Trubridge on Checkpoint next. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday. For all of the North Island except Taranaki, Horowhenua, Kapiti Coast, Wellington and Wairarapa. Mainly fine with areas of cloud, isolated showers about northern and western areas tomorrow. For Taranaki, Horowhenua, Kapiti Coast, Wellington and Wairarapa, cloudy areas. Showers are developing tomorrow, turning to heavy rain in Wellington by the evening. For Nelson and for Marlborough, fine today, rain tomorrow with some heavy falls. Canterbury, rain is setting in this evening with snow down to 400 metres inland overnight. Rain is easing tomorrow afternoon. For Bulla and Westland, rain spreading north today and tomorrow morning with heavy falls, then easing to a few showers north of Hokitika and clearing further south. Otago and Southland, scattered rain or showers, clearing tomorrow morning, leaving areas of cloud. Fine spells for Fiordland, the odd shower mainly in the south, and for the Chatham Islands, Rekohu, cloudy periods. The time is 9 minutes past 6. I'll have updated news headlines for you at 6:30.
No mai hoki mai. Across the United States, there has been a weekend of rallies against the Supreme Court decision to overturn the historic Roe v. Wade decision that in the 1970s gave women the right to an abortion. The latest decision means individual states in the US can now legislate on whether abortions are legal. Many US companies are now offering support and financial assistance to cover employee travel expenses to access abortions, as millions of women and non-binary people face restricted access. The CNN's Sunlin Safati has spent the weekend outside the Supreme Court in Washington.
There has certainly been some emotional and tense moments outside of the Supreme Court where for hours there were hundreds and hundreds of demonstrators protesting Friday's historic Supreme Court decision. There were people on both sides of the aisle, and we certainly heard those passions from people on opposing viewpoints on this issue.
Personal opinion is I'm happy with it, but one of the reasons is it now gives each individual state the right to decide for itself what it wants its law to be regarding abortion, which is true about numerous other things, and no one complains about it.
If you aren't outraged by the Supreme Court decision that was made this week, then you're not paying attention to what's happening in this country, and you need to open your eyes and educate yourself. Maternal mortality rates are shameful. It's atrocious, and it's disproportionately people of color and people that don't have access to resources. And to take that away from them, to take away their agency, to take away their ability to make these decisions for themselves and to access the health care that they need, it's shameful, and it's not what this country is about.
And overall, we did see these protests remain largely peaceful. And late in the day, we did see a large group of those protesters who were speaking out against the ruling, and they took their demonstration on the move. They left here at the Supreme Court. They marched down Independence Avenue, closing down the street, and they went to the White House. They said that they wanted President Biden to see and hear that they are angry.
That anger could be heard across the country in response to the overturning of abortion rights. But not everyone is upset. Many Conservatives, well, they're celebrating. CNN's Nadia Romero has this report.
Abortion bans are illegitimate. Forced motherhood is illegitimate.
From Washington, D.C. to Los Angeles and in between, abortion rights protesters continue to voice their anguish following the ruling by the U.S. Supreme Court to eliminate the federal constitutional right to an abortion.
I'm angry. I'm fired up. The fight is not over. People did this fight 50 years ago. I guess it's our turn to take the fight up again. It may take us 50 years, but we'll get back.
Smaller gatherings of people celebrating the ruling are also taking place.
Millions of lives will be saved by this decision.
In Cedar Rapids, Iowa, a pedestrian was injured by a truck while trying to legally cross the street in front of the federal courthouse during Friday evening's protests in the city, according to Cedar Rapids police.
I look over, I see people trying to push the truck back, and I just instantly got mad and ran over, tried to stop the truck.
Video of the incident shows a truck appearing to push through a group of protesters, with one person falling to the ground after making contact with a vehicle. In Providence, Rhode Island, state Democratic Senate candidate Jennifer Rourke was punched in the face by an off-duty police officer and GOP opponent at an abortion rights rally. In Phoenix, law enforcement used tear gas to disperse a crowd of abortion rights supporters. after they repeatedly pounded on the glass doors of the state Senate building. Greenville, South Carolina. At least 6 people were arrested Saturday at a protest that was attended by hundreds of people in downtown, according to a news release by the Greenville Police Department. A video shared with CNN shows police detaining several people and forcing a man to the ground. An officer is also seen yelling at protesters to get back, although another officer tells protesters who are jeering the police, "We are not on either side." In Washington, D.C., U.S. Capitol Police arrested 2 people on Saturday afternoon for the destruction of property after they were accused of, quote, throwing paint over the fence by the U.S. Supreme Court, USCP tweeted. Large protests have also been held in Philadelphia and Los Angeles, and in New York City, many demonstrators gathered in Washington Square Park to protest the ruling, even though New York state law will remain in place to protect abortion rights.
It's just gone 14 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Dozens of Russian missiles have struck targets across Ukraine, with the capital Kyiv experiencing its heaviest attack in months. They came as leaders of the G7 group of the world's richest nations began a 3-day summit in southern Germany, with war top of the agenda. They're expected to commit further military support while also reinforcing their desire that Russia be defeated. The BBC's Chris Mason reports from Germany.
The leaders of the world's richest countries gather to work out what to do next about Ukraine. They begin by mocking President Putin. The Canadian Prime Minister suggests they should mimic the Russian leader by riding bareback on a horse, as he has done. Beyond the jokes, though, there are real differences of emphasis and approach here about how much and for how long Ukraine should be helped. The UK insists it must be for the long haul. The Prime Minister, though, acknowledges some are tiring of it.
I think that the pressure is there and the anxiety is there, and we've got to be honest about that. The G7 has been solid and we continue to be solid. But in order to protect that unity, in order to make it work, you've got to have really, really honest discussions about the implications of what's going on.
These 2 men look like the best of friends.
A reunion of a year old now.
But in private, the Prime Minister emphasised to the French President any attempt to settle the conflict now, with Russia having stolen Ukrainian territory, would be a mistake. At this summit, the aim is to portray as much unity and resolve as possible as the conflict in Ukraine drags on and its costs back home, not least rising prices, become more obvious. President Biden, in conversation with the summit's host, the German Chancellor, stressed a sense of togetherness was imperative.
We have to stay together, because Putin has been counting on from the beginning. And somehow NATO would, and the G7 would splinter, but we haven't, and we're not going to. So we can't let this aggression take the form it has and get away with it.
The fundamental truth for all of the leaders here is the democratic pressures that they face back home from their parties and their public. Boris Johnson is well aware of this, of course. This matters because the leaders have to mould and flex their views to reflect their domestic audience, unlike their opponent, President Putin, who does not. The challenge then is how to stand together, how to move as one. Not easy and not guaranteed in the long term.
Well, a little bit earlier we heard calls for mandatory reporting of the gender pay gap. Well, new research in Australia shows that what that reporting can reveal. The latest data shows women across the ditch are vastly underpaid over their lifetimes and unfairly miss out on top management roles. The numbers, compiled by Australia's Workplace Gender Equality Agency, show millennial women will, on average, earn just 70% of the male equivalent by the time they turn 45. Here's the ABC's Matt Bamford.
Beverly Baker from the National Older Women's Network doesn't need anyone to explain to her how the gender pay gap works.
I'm a woman and I have worked all my life. I know what that pay gap is like. Look, we have yet to come as a species to accept that women are the ones that have children and that our survival is completely and utterly dependent on women having children. Whatever we do is tiny in comparison to what is needed.
But new research from the Commonwealth's Workplace Gender Equality Agency has reaffirmed her experience. The report shows women earn an average of $250 a week less than men. In 2021, at no age were more than 50% of women working full-time, yet higher paid management roles were almost exclusively reserved for full-time workers. Beverly Baker says it's another damning assessment of an unequal workforce.
Look, it's always been fuss and it's not good enough. Those women are doing jobs equally as talented as men, working equally as hard, yet for some reason the fact that their gender is getting in the way of them earning the same kind of money. Now, I think that is bigotry, that is sexism, and at its heart it's misogyny that says a man is more valuable than a woman.
Despite countless promises from government and the corporate sector, the latest statistics show little progress on workforce conditions for women. Minister for Women, Katie Gallagher, told RN Breakfast the report reveals how much reform is needed.
Well, this report is, again, really stark, isn't it? It shows that women are behind in terms of pay at every stage of their working life. It gets worse, of course, when they're having children or caring, having caring responsibilities, and it disadvantages part-time women and women getting managerial opportunities. So there is a lot to do there, Patricia, in terms of trying to address this.
Findings show the biggest changes happen at the age of 35, when most Australians are starting families. At that point, women leave full-time work for part-time or casual roles, while most men remain full-time. Georgie Dent is from advocacy organisation The Parenthood.
This data illustrates very clearly the problem that we have when it comes to supporting women to participate in paid work. So what we know is that in Australia, our female workforce participation rate has been going backwards in global terms. We rank 70th in the world for female workforce participation.
She says it shows how inadequate Australia is in ensuring women can remain in the workforce after having children.
We have not invested in the infrastructure that we know enables women to combine paid work with caring responsibilities. Specifically, we have got one of the least adequate paid parental leave schemes in the developed world, and we have got some of the most expensive early childhood education and care in the world.
The Albanese government has made childcare reform a signature policy. The report authors say policies targeting gender-neutral parental leave and flexible work for men and women are also important. Minister for Women, Katie Gallagher, flagged the issue will also be raised between employers and unions at the government's Job Summit later in the year.
Obviously, things like childcare are important, feminised industries getting adequate pay is important, but also looking at flexible arrangements at work and how, being part-time shouldn't actually disqualify you from having more senior roles.
Georgie Dent says policy reform is crucial in closing the gender pay gap.
And it is not a matter of because women are not educated or qualified or even ambitious. It is just because we have got a whole lot of policy settings that put men and women on totally different paths, and women end up paying the financial price for that over the course of their lives.
Authorities in South Africa are trying to work out how at least 22 young people died in a nightclub. The victims were found lying across floors and tables in the coastal town of East London. It's thought there may have been a gas leak. The BBC's Shingai Nyoka has this report.
The nightclub where so many young people died. Police remain at the scene of the incident, in which the cause of these deaths remains far from clear. Officers responded to distress calls at Enyobeni Tavern in the early hours of this morning. Most of the victims were teenagers.
At this stage, the parents have been told they have to visit the morgue to identify their children. The problem was police were trying to secure the crime scene or preserve evidence, so they had to restrict access.
South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa expressed his condolences to the families and called for a thorough investigation. The police have ruled out a stampede as the cause. There are suggestions that the revellers could have inhaled or ingested a toxic substance.
To Australia now, where vaping is a growing industry, despite national health authorities warning it can cause serious health problems. In New South Wales alone, the number of people vaping has more than doubled in the space of 1 year. Now, an investigation by ABC Australia has found there's a significant black market for vapes, and it's rampant among teenagers. Grace Tobin reports.
Vaping among young people in Australia is surging.
The bell rings, you want to go to the bathroom and you just literally see like tens of kids like sitting in a circle just all sharing one, and it's crazy.
They're addicting and they taste nice and smell good. So I think that's like a big factor on why people enjoy doing it.
Is it considered cool to vape?
Yes, I feel like people think it is. And in a way, because of how popular it is, people feel like they have to do it to fit in.
In Sydney's western suburbs, Principal Brenda Quayle tackles the problem of vaping at her high school every day.
We see it consistently. It is an ongoing, consistent situation that we deal with at a school level. I'd be pretty confident this is a current social trend that most educators in all contexts are dealing with.
Right around Australia.
Oh, absolutely.
Vaping was hailed as a new way to quit smoking. Instead, research shows it's addicting a new generation to nicotine.
Use of e-cigarettes in that younger age group isn't about giving up smoking. It's about a completely new habit.
Emily Banks is a professor of epidemiology and public health at the Australian National University.
They cause addiction, they can cause poisoning, toxicity through inhalation, which can lead to seizures, trauma and burns, lung injury, and we found that they are harmful overall.
It's illegal to buy or sell nicotine vapes in Australia unless you have a prescription from a doctor. But a Four Corners investigation has found illicit sales on social media are rife, with hundreds of suppliers to choose from across Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram and TikTok. 17-year-old Ruby told us dealers supply vapes to school kids and even offer free delivery.
I don't want to be like a massive snitch, but it's actually like super easy. But like you go on your phone, you're like, can I pick up a vape? And they're like 20 minutes, and you just meet them somewhere and they just hand it to you.
How do you know who to message when you want to vape?
Word of mouth, mostly. I think it's the same as any other drugs, any social media as well. Yeah, it's whatever.
Nicotine vapes are also being illegally sold under the counter in major tobacconist chains and convenience stores. State and federal authorities are targeting the illicit vape market. But our investigation has found the black market is still thriving. Vape shop owners like Maxim Fitchkin, who aren't legally allowed to sell nicotine, blame the current regulations for pushing vaping underground.
By restricting a consumer's ability to be able to source nicotine legally and making it far more difficult is forcing them to have to go to the black market and purchase disposable vapes.
In her final year of high school, Ruby is struggling to kick her vape habit, and she's worried about the number of young people hooked on nicotine.
And like the teenager in me doesn't want to be telling you this. Like I want to be like, I want to keep vaping. But when you actually step back and look at it, it's like from an adult perspective, it is so shocking to see like how addicted and how many people are addicted.
Finally tonight, this year's Glastonbury Music Festival. It's back and it's just closed after some legendary and unexpected performances. Sir Paul McCartney's set even included a digital form of John Lennon. The BBC's Katie Razzle with all the dazzle from Worthy Farm in Somerset on the triumphant return of the mega massive event.
Glastonbury is going out on a high. Earlier in the Legends slot, Diana Ross pumped out hit after hit. And history has been made at the festival by the youngest ever solo headliner Billie Eilish. Hey, don't make it bad. And the oldest, Sir Paul McCartney, whose 36-song set last night included a nearly 5-minute sing-along to Hey Jude. And some special guest appearances. There was even a much-missed Beatle, 42 years after his death.
Everybody saw the sunshine, oh yeah.
We're back together.
But with 100 performance stages, Glastonbury is about so much more than the headline acts. This festival celebrates creativity, imagination and inclusivity, with a good dose of change the world thrown in.
We will not let Russia's war break us.
Whether it's an address by Ukraine's president,
Climate!
or climate change activist Greta Thunberg,
And so many women and so many girls are going to die because of this.
or the outrage expressed by stars like Olivia Rodrigo about the recent US Supreme Court decision on Roe v. Wade, politics is never far away.
We're not closed off from the world here. We're not about escapism. We're about, dealing with the world, enjoying ourselves, coming together.
Kendrick Lamar is tonight's headline act. Despite efforts in recent years to make the artist lineup much more diverse, the crowd still doesn't reflect that. This was British rapper AJ Tracey on the Pyramid stage on Saturday.
I don't care who it is that's listening to our music, as long as everyone's being respectful. It'd be nice if we could just educate people a bit on the privilege you do have. But when I look at the crowd, I'm just grateful, to be honest. I'm like, wow, these people are all here to listen to me. I better not fall over, and that's it.
This has been a delayed 50th birthday celebration for the UK's biggest festival. Glastonbury is ending for the year, with many years in these Somerset fields still to look forward to.
And just before we go, a little bit more feedback on drugs. Fentanyl, the listener who said don't do drugs should be the message, is ignoring the last 40 years of the war on drugs. The message has always been don't do drugs, and yet people, they keep doing drugs. We do know that, don't we? It's good to see a health approach being taken because it works, this person says. That's it from us tonight. To keep updated all throughout the night with our late news team. I'm going to go home. I'm going to have a bit of a kip, and then I'm going to get back up and do it all again, because First Up is live from 5 tomorrow, and that's with me. We're going to have Nicola Willis on. She's going to talk about, her response to Roe v. Wade, as well as her party's response to the big decision in the US. Do join us.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Kia ora tātou, ko Ivy Ashton tēnei. A drug testing company is worried there'll be more fentanyl overdoses and doubts the powerful opioid is only being used illegally in the Wairarapa. GPs administering vaccines are expecting a surge in bookings for children to get the free flu vaccine from Friday when they become eligible. New Zealand will commit a further $8 million to Ukraine for medical kit, extended intelligence and logistics deployments, and what it describes as non-lethal equipment. And Nationals leader Christopher Luxon insists all his MPs back his commitment not to change abortion law if elected next year. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
This morning on First Up, DHB's become things of the past. On Friday, we visited Wairoa as they prepared for the transition.
If you can't afford to go and see a doctor, and although we pay a low fee for access, $10 is still a lot of money. And then you've got your $5 script on top of that, so making ends meet is a huge problem.
And the US Supreme Court overrules decades of legal precedent on abortion rights.
In some states, they'd even passed laws that were simply waiting to be signed onto the books.
Join me, Nathan Rarere, live from 5 weekdays on RNZ National, or download First Up, the podcast, at your leisure.
Kia ora, Nathan, although actually it won't be our Nathan tomorrow, as Nick just told you, Nick Tubridge. Having just finished Checkpoint, you'll be hosting First Up tomorrow from 5 o'clock. So, Nick, I hope you get a good night's kip, because you're going to need it. Good on you for putting in the hard yards to keep RNZ going. RNZ National. I'm Brian Crump, by the way, getting ready for another night on RNZ National. Now, I'm also doing a little bit more than normal because Karen, won't be doing Lately tonight. Sorry about that. She is going to be filling in for Jim Mora this coming Sunday. So she is taking a rest from Lately. So instead of Lately,